They thought my century-old family farm was just an eyesore standing in their way. Armed with fake documents and bulldozers, they tore down the barn my great-grandfather built with his own hands. "It's for a community dog park," they said. And they quickly built one to pacify the neighbors. But I discovered their secret. Luxury condo plans hiding behind this facade. What the HOA president didn't realize: my grandfather secured the water rights to their entire subdivision decades ago. After confronting her directly at their sham dog park opening, getting ignored, I turned a hidden valve that would leave 200 mansions bone dry within hours. Would you have the courage to use a forgotten legal right to reclaim your family's stolen legacy? I'm Frank Hardrove, 55. And the Hardrove family has worked on this 15-acre farmstead since 1887. My great-grandfather purchased this land with gold coins he'd saved from working in the Pennsylvania coal mines. He chose this spot specifically for its natural spring and rich soil, perfect for the sustainable farming practices he'd learned in the old country. My grandfather didn't just maintain the farm. He engineered an innovative irrigation system during the Dust Bowl that eventually supplied water to the entire county. He worked with water engineers from the state university, spending every penny the farm earned for 3 years to build a system that would sustain not just our crops, but the entire community during droughts. He was a visionary who protected our rights with ironclad legal documents that would later save everything we built. When developers arrived in the 90s, the surrounding farmland quickly transformed into cul-de-sacs and tennis courts. I negotiated firm boundaries with Westland Development. My organic farm would remain independent forever, specifically exempt from any future homeowners association. We signed contracts, filed with the county, and shook hands. For 20 years, I grew award-winning produce that supplied local schools, food banks, and farmers markets. My wife Martha and I raised our children here, teaching them sustainable farming practices our ancestors pioneered. Everything changed when Cynthia Whitmore, a 55-year-old retired corporate attorney from Chicago, moved into the newly built Meadowbrook Estates and quickly maneuvered her way into becoming HOA president. With her perfectly highlighted blonde hair and perpetual country club tan, she immediately targeted my unsightly agricultural operation with a systematic campaign. Certified letters arrived listing imaginary violations. My great-grandfather's silo was an unauthorized structure exceeding height restrictions. The historic red barn that tourists photographed became non-compliant with architectural standards. And the roosters that had been crowing on this land for over a century were suddenly noise violations in a residential zone. Each letter arrived like clockwork every Monday morning, printed on expensive cream-colored HOA letterhead, threatening fines of $100 per day for non-compliance. I called the county zoning office, who confirmed what I already knew. My farm was explicitly exempt from HOA regulations under the original development agreement. I decided to take the high road. I invited Cynthia to tour the farm, hoping she'd understand its historical significance and community value. Perhaps if she saw the children from Jefferson Elementary planting their pumpkin patch, or the Veterans Therapy Group working in our lavender field, she might recognize we weren't just growing crops. We were nurturing the community. Instead, she arrived in a white Range Rover with 3 board members and a camera, documenting every weathered fence post and tractor part as evidence of blight. She wrinkled her nose at the compost heap and gasped dramatically when a harmless garden snake slithered across our path. "This isn't personal, Frank," she said, with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "We're simply upholding community standards." Meadowbrook residents paid premium prices for luxury homes. not to live next to all this. The next day, a real estate developer, her former law partner Roger Dalton, knocked on my door, offering $750,000 for land worth triple that amount. When I declined, his friendly demeanor instantly hardened. "You might want to reconsider, Mr. Hardrove. That barn your grandfather built. Those heirloom crops. The stream where your kids learn to fish. How much are those memories really worth? Compared to what we're offering?" Things could get very complicated for stubborn sellers who don't recognize progress. When intimidation failed, the harassment intensified. Daily fines began accumulating, despite having no legal basis. Anonymous complaints led to environmental inspectors showing up to investigate agricultural runoff. They found none. Someone even called animal control about my perfectly healthy livestock. My longtime friend and attorney, Bill Rodriguez, reviewed the original development agreements. "They have absolutely no jurisdiction over your property," he assured me. "These harassment tactics are illegal." We sent a cease and desist letter. That bought us 3 weeks of peace. Then came the unmarked survey stakes along my eastern boundary, the fertile section where I grew heirloom tomatoes. That supplied 5 local restaurants. That's when I knew they weren't just trying to pressure me. They were preparing to take what was mine by force. Tuesday, April 18th. A date forever burned in my memory. I was delivering organic produce to Jefferson Elementary School when Martha's panic call came through. "They've got bulldozers at the property line. They're knocking down the fence. Come quickly." I abandoned the delivery and raced home in my old pickup. By the time I arrived, the century-old oak fence posts were splintered on the ground. 2 yellow Caterpillar bulldozers were advancing toward my barn, where we stored our antique John Deere tractor, our heritage seed collection, and equipment my family had maintained across generations. A crowd had gathered. Some HOA residents watching in horror, others nodding in approval. Cynthia stood behind a police line with 2 uniformed officers, smugly holding a leather portfolio containing what she claimed was a legal seizure notice. One officer, later identified as her brother-in-law, Deputy Mark Collins, physically restrained me when I tried to halt the destruction. "This is completely illegal," I shouted, as they handcuffed me. "You have no authority. This is private property protected by county ordinances." "It's all perfectly legal, old man." Deputy Collins smirked, forcing me into the back of his patrol car. "The county approved our community enhancement project. Should have taken the money when it was offered." From the back of the police car, I watched in horror as they demolished the historic barn my great-grandfather built by hand during the Great Depression, using timber he'd harvested from our own woodland. Martha was filming everything until they confiscated her phone, claiming she was interfering with official business. What they didn't notice were the security cameras I had installed weeks earlier. A precaution Bill had recommended. These cameras captured everything, including Cynthia's unguarded comment to the bulldozer operator. "Make sure you take out that hideous barn completely. We need clear views for the luxury condos." That moment of carelessness would eventually be her undoing. But as I sat there, watching generations of my family's work reduced to splinters, I felt utterly powerless against the machine they had built to steal my land. 6 hours later, they released me without charges, because no legitimate charges existed. I returned to find Martha surrounded by sympathetic neighbors who had brought casseroles and outrage in equal measure. The seizure notice Cynthia had waved around so confidently was an elaborate forgery on county letterhead. as we discovered when Bill contacted the county administrator directly. "This is criminal," Bill said, his normally composed demeanor cracking with anger. "They forged government documents, committed destruction of property, trespassing, and fraud. My attorney filed for an emergency injunction while I assessed the devastation. My beloved barn reduced to splintered heaps. An acre of prime topsoil bulldozed. And wrought iron fencing already installed around what a freshly planted sign proclaimed as Whitmore Community Dog Park. Opening soon." The emergency hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. the following day. Martha and I barely slept. The absence of the barn's familiar silhouette against the night sky was a physical ache that kept us tossing and turning. By dawn, we made a pot of strong coffee and laid out our documents across the kitchen table. Deeds, surveys, development agreements, water rights certificates. A paper trail documenting my family's connection to this land. Longer than Cynthia Whitmore had been alive. When we arrived at the county courthouse, we faced not just Cynthia's attorney, but Judge Walter Phillips, a silver-haired man with a golf tan, who we later learned was a regular partner in Cynthia's husband's weekend foursomes at Meadowbrook Country Club. Their legal argument was absurd. They claimed my property had been absorbed into the HOA through adverse possession, despite clear documentation proving otherwise. What they didn't anticipate was my meticulous record-keeping, a habit my father had instilled in me since childhood. As I unfolded the documents on the judge's bench, memories flooded back. My father teaching me to respect these papers more than gold. His weathered hands carefully showing me where each generation had protected our future. I presented the original 1887 deed, bearing my great-grandfather's careful signature. The same man who'd escaped poverty in Europe to build something lasting for his family. Next came the water rights certificates from 1912, with official state seals, created during the drought that claimed 3 neighboring farms, but couldn't defeat my grandfather's foresight. Finally, I presented the explicit 1994 development agreement, stating my farm would remain independent in perpetuity, with no HOA jurisdiction. Signed the year my son was born, when I'd promised him this land would be his legacy, too. Most damning of all, Bill played the security camera footage. The courtroom fell silent as Cynthia's voice rang out clearly. "We need clear views for the luxury condos." Her face blanched as she realized her careless words had been captured. "Your Honor," my attorney argued, "we have video evidence of Ms. Whitmore admitting their true intention is to build luxury condos, not a dog park. This is fraud, trespassing, destruction of property, and abuse of process." Judge Phillips shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that his golf buddy's wife had placed him in an untenable position. He reluctantly granted our temporary injunction, halting further development, but not ordering restoration of my property. "Ownership will be determined at trial," he ruled, scheduling proceedings for 3 months later. That evening, reviewing the case with Bill in my farmhouse kitchen, we discovered something that changed everything. "Look at this," Bill said, pointing to a clause in the yellowed water rights document my grandfather had filed in 1912, during a devastating drought that had bankrupted many neighboring farms. "Your family retained exclusive rights to the aquifer and irrigation system, with conditional easements granted for residential use." The legal language was dense, but its implications were staggering. The document granted my family continued control over water access to what eventually became the entire subdivision. The easements were conditional upon respecting property boundaries, and agricultural priority use conditions. Cynthia and her bulldozers had flagrantly violated that. My grandfather always said the water system would protect us. I whispered. Memories flooding back. Of him showing me the underground pipes and cisterns as a boy. I never understood exactly what he meant until now. Bill's eyes widened as he grasped the full potential of our discovery. Frank, this is incredible. Your grandfather didn't just build an irrigation system. He legally established the area's first private water utility. Before modern regulations existed. And the documents show something even more powerful. He pointed to a clause in faded ink. The contract specifically states that if your agricultural rights are ever violated, you can terminate all water access with just 30 days' notice. No questions asked. No court approval needed. When Meadowbrook was built, they connected to your system instead of extending county lines to save money. That $1 million shortcut is about to become their worst nightmare. The next morning, Bill filed discovery requests, demanding all communications between the HOA board and any developers regarding my property. The emails we received revealed the full scope of their scheme. Messages between Cynthia and Skyline developers laid bare their plans. Their proposal wasn't just a dog park. It was phase 1 of Whitmore Heights, a luxury condominium complex with a private clubhouse and infinity pool, all built on my seized farmland. The old farmer doesn't realize what he's sitting on, Cynthia wrote in one particularly damning email. Once we secure the land, we'll force renegotiation of the water rights, or simply have the county condemn them through eminent domain. Either way, the return on investment will be substantial enough to make this worth our while. But Cynthia and her developers had critically miscalculated. The county couldn't override these water rights without due process and just compensation, which would cost millions and take years. By bulldozing my property without legal authority, they had violated the conditional easements that supplied water to their mansions. Frank, Bill said, with a slow smile. That reminded me of my grandfather's expression when he'd outmaneuvered a cattle buyer trying to lowball him. They just dug their own grave. I stared at the documents. My grandfather's elegant signature at the bottom of each page. He'd been gone for 40 years. But somehow, he'd reached across time to protect our land when we needed it most. While our case proceeded through the courts at a glacial pace, Cynthia acted as if victory was assured. Construction crews installed elaborate wrought iron fencing around their new park. Expensive teak benches and decorative dog waste stations appeared overnight. Glossy flyers announced the grand opening of Whitmore Park, a premier community amenity, scheduled for the following month. Meanwhile, I consulted with Patricia Kazan, the state's leading water rights attorney, who had defended farmers against corporate interests for 30 years. After reviewing my documentation, she confirmed, "These are among the strongest water rights I've ever seen. Your grandfather was brilliant in how he structured these agreements. The conditional easements required 30 days written notice before termination, which I immediately filed with the county water authority. The notice stated that due to willful easement violations, including destruction of agricultural structures, all residential water easements would terminate in 30 days, unless my property was fully restored and damages compensated. Martha and I personally delivered copies to each HOA board member and all 200 households in the subdivision. Some residents slammed doors in our faces. Others listened with growing concern as we explained the situation. A few, mostly the original homeowners, Who remembered when the development agreements were signed? Expressed outright support for our position. Cynthia immediately held an emergency board meeting, dismissing my notice as an empty threat from a desperate old farmer trying to extort the community. He can't possibly shut off water to an entire community, she assured worried residents, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light as she waved away concerns. The county will intervene immediately. Her legal experience in corporate takeovers hadn't prepared her for rural water law. Unlike city utilities, these rights predated modern regulations and were specifically protected from government interference. The same county water engineer, who had once worked with my grandfather, had already privately confirmed my position was unassailable. While awaiting the deadline, I contacted local media with our story and evidence. Investigative reporter Sarah Chan, from the Independent weekly paper, began digging into Cynthia's connections with Skyline developers and the suspicious approval process for the dog park. Day 31 arrived. The grand opening celebration for Whitmore Park. The park was already operational, with families and their dogs enjoying the new space. Red ribbons had been cut, and residents were exploring the meticulously designed dog play areas, with agility equipment, tunnels, and a fancy water station. I put on my work overalls, red plaid shirt, and straw hat, my everyday farm clothes that had seen decades of honest work. With my water rights documentation in hand, I marched directly to the park. Cynthia was there in her powder blue business suit, clipboard in hand, speaking with a small group of HOA members about the successful community initiative. Several dogs ran and played in the sandy enclosure, while their owners chatted on the sidelines. "What do you think you're doing on my property?" I demanded, confronting her directly in the middle of the park. My voice carried across the area, causing several people to turn and stare. Cynthia's practiced smile faltered. "Mr. Hardgrove, this is now community property. We've been through this." I held up my documentation. "This is still my land, and you know it. You built this park illegally. And those luxury condos you're secretly planning will never happen." She glanced nervously at the other residents. "I don't know what you're talking about. This is just a beautiful community dog park." "Is that so?" I pointed to the residents gathering around us. "Do all of you know that your HOA president is planning to replace this park with condos? That she forged documents to steal my land?" The confrontation grew heated as residents began murmuring among themselves. Some approached with their dogs, creating exactly the scene captured in the photos that would later expose the HOA's schemes. "You'll regret this," Cynthia hissed, trying to maintain her composure as her plans began unraveling. "No," I replied firmly. "You will. You have until sundown to recognize my property rights, or every home in Meadowbrook Estates will be without water by morning." I turned and walked away, leaving Cynthia to deal with the increasingly suspicious residents.